how one gunner's insane method tripled anti-aircraft kill rates. By late 1943, the vast Pacific Ocean had become a graveyard for American ships. The enemy was relentless, a phantom that appeared on the horizon as a speck and grew with terrifying speed into a harbinger of destruction. On the decks of destroyers, cruisers, and carriers, young men, many barely out of their teens, stood shoulder to shoulder at the anti-aircraft batteries. They were the last line of defense, but their most advanced guns were failing. In the early years of the war, the hit rate for anti-aircraft fire was tragically low. For every plane shot down by naval anti-aircraft guns, thousands upon thousands of rounds were expended. Some estimates put the hit rate for close-in weapons at a dismal 3%. Gunners would fire streams of tracer rounds, painting the sky with fleeting lines of red, only to watch helplessly as their shells exploded in empty air. They were throwing a wall of steel at the sky, but the wall was full of holes. The math was brutal, and the consequences were measured in fire, twisted metal, and lost lives. Ship after ship was sent to the bottom or crippled by aerial attacks. They seemed powerless to stop. But what if a single shoebox-sized invention cooked up by a university professor the military establishment thought was crazy could give every shell a brain of its own? This is the story of the insane method that transformed a slim chance of survival into a weapon that would dominate the skies, turn the tide against the most terrifying aerial weapon of the war, and change naval warfare forever. To understand the revolution, you have to understand the impossible problem naval gunners faced every day. Hitting a fast-moving plane from a moving, rolling ship is one of the most complex physics problems imaginable. It's not like shooting a static target on a range. This is four-dimensional chess played with explosions, where the board itself is constantly tilting and bucking. Imagine you're a gunner on a 40mm Bofors gun, the workhorse of the fleet's close-range air defense. A Japanese Val dive bomber is spotted peeling out of the clouds, flying at 300 miles per hour, thousands of yards away. Your gun fires a shell that'll take 3, maybe 4 seconds to reach it. In those 4 seconds, that plane has moved the length of 4 football fields. You can't shoot at the plane. You have to shoot at a patch of empty sky where the plane will be. This is called calculating lead. You have to predict the future, and you have to do it in seconds, with adrenaline coursing through your veins, the deck pitching beneath your feet, and the deafening roar of combat filling the air. The gunner's main tool for this was the iron ring sight. It was a simple system of concentric circles that helped a gunner guess the lead, but it was fundamentally a guessing game. It relied on instinct, experience, and a whole lot of luck. An experienced gunner might develop a feel for it, but it was an art, not a science. And against swarms of enemy aircraft, art wasn't enough. The Navy needed a scientific solution. The early years of the war proved this in the most brutal way. Ship after ship was damaged or sunk because its anti-aircraft fire was tragically porous. The Japanese pilots were skilled, their aircraft nimble, and they pressed their attacks with devastating courage. The Navy knew this was a critical failure. They threw immense resources at the problem, turning to big-name contractors and their own internal engineering bureaus. These industrial giants proposed what seemed like the logical solution: massive, complex, centralized fire control computers. On battleships and cruisers, these were mechanical marvels like the Mark 37 gunfire control system, which used a sophisticated analog computer, the Ford Mark I, that weighed tons. It was a breathtakingly intricate assembly of gears and servos designed to crunch all of the data, target speed from radar, range from optical rangefinders, wind speed, the ship's roll and pitch, to produce a firing solution for the big 5-inch guns. On paper, they were brilliant, especially for engaging distant, high-altitude bombers. In the chaos of close-in combat, however, they were often delicate, slow, and just too complex. The data they needed was hard to get accurately for a fast-jinking fighter plane, and by the time the mechanical brain calculated a solution, the target had often changed course. They were trying to solve the problem by replacing the human, but they created systems that were too cumbersome for the split-second reality of a dive bomber screaming down from the heavens. For the lighter 20mm and 40mm guns that were a ship's last hope against an attacker that broke through, these giant computers were useless. The gunners were on their own. Many Navy experts began to think the problem of hitting planes with small-caliber guns was simply unsolvable by a machine. Gunnery, they concluded, would always rely on human judgment and sheer volume of fire. That dismal early war hit rate seemed, for a time, to be an unbreakable barrier. Far from the war-torn Pacific, in the quiet, ivy-covered halls of the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, a professor was working on a problem that seemed entirely unrelated. Dr. Charles Stark Draper was not a weapons designer. He wasn't a military man. He was an academic, an instrumentation expert, and a master of one very specific and elegant device, the gyroscope. Known as Doc to his students, Draper was a unique character, a man with a degree in psychology from Stanford who had fallen in love with engineering at MIT. He was a self-described greasy thumb mechanic who learned to fly his own plane because he was frustrated with the poor quality of flight instruments. His entire philosophy was built on hands-on, practical problem-solving. He founded the MIT Instrumentation Laboratory in the 1930s, a place where students didn't just learn from books, but got their hands dirty building and testing real devices. Draper was fascinated by the way the spinning rotors of gyroscopes could provide a stable reference point, seemingly defying gravity and motion. In 1940, while consulting for the Sperry Gyroscope Company, a major military contractor, an idea began to form in his mind. An idea so counterintuitive, so contrary to the accepted wisdom of the time, that the military establishment would later dismiss it as insane. The big, complex computers were failing because they were trying to solve the entire physics problem from scratch. They needed to know the target's exact speed, range, and direction. But Draper realized something profound. What if you didn't need to know any of that? What if, instead of calculating the target's movement through space, you simply measured the movement of the gunner tracking the target? This was the conceptual leap that changed everything. A gunner, instinctively keeping his sight on a plane, was already solving the most complex part of the equation with his eyes and reflexes. As the gunner swung the weapon to follow the target, the speed of that swing, the angular velocity, was directly related to the lead required. A faster swing meant a faster or closer target, both needing more lead. The human was already the best tracking computer available. He just needed a tool to translate his actions into a perfect firing solution. Draper's Bastogne insane method was to use a gyroscope not to stabilize the gun, but to measure the rate of the gunner's turn. He envisioned a small, self-contained device mounted directly on a gun. Inside, a spinning gyroscope would sense the gunner's motion. Using a clever system of springs and gears, this motion would automatically offset the aiming reticle in the gun sight. The gunner's job would become incredibly simple. Just keep the glowing dot on the plane. The device would do the rest. By keeping the dot on the target, the gunner was automatically forcing the gun barrel to point ahead of it by the exact amount needed. It was human instinct, augmented by the cold precision of physics. To prove his theory, Draper and his students went to the MIT basement. They mounted a simple .22 caliber rifle on a pipe stand and bolted on a crude, shoebox-sized prototype. The target? A towel strung on a moving rope. It was classic garage inventor stuff, but it worked. Draper found he could hit the small, moving target effortlessly, time and time again. He had proven the principle. He had created a device that could give any ordinary person the superhuman ability to hit a moving target without conscious thought. Armed with his successful basement prototype, Draper took his invention to the U.S. Navy's Bureau of Ordnance. The response was not what he'd hoped for. The engineers there, accustomed to dealing with industrial titans like Westinghouse and their massive, complex machines, were deeply skeptical. They looked at this academic and his little shoebox of gyros and were incredulous. His idea was dismissed as impractical and unsound. They called it insane. They couldn't wrap their heads around how a device that didn't measure the target's speed or range could possibly work. It violated the principles they had spent their careers mastering. Draper was essentially told to go back to his university and leave weapons to the professionals. But Draper was persistent. He knew he was right. Described by his colleagues as a complex genius, he was not easily deterred. He and his team at the MIT Instrumentation Laboratory continued to refine the device, with some funding from the Sperry Gyroscope Company, which owned the rights to the invention. His break came not from the American military, but from a more desperate ally. A representative from the British Admiralty, Sir Henry Fowler, saw a demonstration at an MIT shooting range in December 1940 and was immediately impressed, recognizing its revolutionary potential. The British, having faced the Luftwaffe for over a year, were in dire need of a better solution for close-in air defense and wanted to acquire prototypes for testing. This foreign interest helped reignite the U.S. Navy's curiosity. Reluctantly, they agreed to a formal demonstration. At the Watertown Arsenal, in front of the same skeptical Navy officials, Draper and his team showed off the device's uncanny ability to hit moving targets. The sight, which would become the Mark 14 gun sight, outperformed every conventional sight it was tested against. The officials who had ridiculed the idea were forced to confront the undeniable evidence. This professor's insane method worked. The skepticism shattered. In August 1941, the Navy placed an order for experimental units, and that trickle soon became a flood. The Navy realized that Draper hadn't just invented a new sight, he had handed them the key to the short-range anti-aircraft problem. Production ramped up massively, with industrial giants like Eastman Kodak, with its expertise in precision optics and mechanics, being brought in to manufacture the complex devices. Ultimately, a staggering 85,000 Mark 14 gun sights would be built and installed on American and British warships. The sight was a masterpiece of rugged engineering. Housed in a waterproof case the size of a shoebox, it was mounted on the 20mm Oerlikon and 40mm Bofors guns. It contained two gyroscopes, one for horizontal movement, traverse, and one for vertical movement, elevation. The gunner looked through a piece of glass onto which the image of an illuminated reticle was projected, one of the world's first heads-up displays. A second crewman would input the target's estimated range via a dial on the side, which adjusted the calculations for bullet drop. As the gunner tracked the target, the gyros sensed the rate of motion and, through a series of mechanical linkages, shifted the reticle. The gunner's task was reduced to what felt like a simple video game. Keep the glowing dot on the enemy plane. It was intuitive, deadly, and effective. By mid-1943, the Mark 14 was being widely deployed throughout the fleet. The change was immediate and dramatic. During proving ground tests, the hit probability for guns equipped with the Mark 14 shot up, in some cases, more than tripling. The wall of steel was finally starting to solidify. This single invention was about to face its ultimate test. As the war entered its most desperate phase, a new and horrifying tactic emerged from Japan: the kamikaze. This was an enemy actively trying to crash into you. How did this new thinking gun sight perform against a human-guided missile? The results would save thousands of lives and leave a legacy that reaches to the modern day. Stories of innovation like this, the hidden histories behind the tech that shapes our world, are what we explore every week. In October 1944, during the monumental Battle of Leyte Gulf, the war in the Pacific took a dark and terrifying turn. With its corps of experienced pilots decimated after years of brutal attrition, Japan unleashed a shocking new weapon: the kamikaze. The word means divine wind, and for the American sailors who faced it, it was a hellish storm. These weren't just planes dropping bombs, they were human-guided missiles. Pilots, often with minimal training, would fly their explosive-laden aircraft directly into American ships, intending to die in the attack. The psychological impact was immense. A conventional bomber might be driven off by damage or fear. The kamikaze pilot had no instinct for self-preservation. Even a plane crippled by anti-aircraft fire, trailing smoke and flames, could still complete its mission as long as the pilot was alive and had some control. It had to be utterly destroyed, blown apart in the air. This put an almost unbearable pressure on the anti-aircraft gunners. The close-in 20mm and 40mm guns became the most important weapons on the ship, and mounted atop thousands of them was Dr. Draper and his team's invention, the Mark 14 gun sight. The moment of truth had arrived. The shoebox was the primary tool standing between thousands of sailors and a fiery death. The effect was nothing short of revolutionary. On ships equipped with the new sight, gunners who once sprayed the sky with panicked, hopeful bursts now had a tool that gave them unprecedented confidence. That old, crippling feeling of helplessness was replaced with a cold, focused precision. Gunners could put the illuminated reticle on the nose of a diving Zero, hold it there, and fire, knowing their shells weren't just flying into the sky, but were being guided by a hidden intelligence. The results were stunning. Ships equipped with Mark 14 sights saw their effectiveness against these suicide attackers skyrocket. In the face of the kamikaze threat, the lethality of anti-aircraft fire saw a quantum leap. While long-range 5-inch guns with their new proximity-fused shells formed the first line of defense, it was the short-range guns that had to deal with the leakers. During the brutal Okinawa campaign, it was these 20mm and 40mm guns, the ones that benefited most from the Mark 14, that were accounting for the lion's share of kamikaze kills. The sight had turned every gunner into a potential ace. Consider the USS Enterprise, the legendary Big E, a carrier that had fought in nearly every major naval battle of the war. Throughout 1944 and 1945, she endured repeated kamikaze attacks. On April 11, 1945, off Okinawa, a massive wave of suicide planes descended. Enterprise's gunners fought back with ferocious accuracy. They opened fire on 2 planes, shooting one down just 1,500 yards off the starboard quarter. Another diving plane was struck repeatedly, but still managed to clip the ship's port side, its bomb detonating just under the hull before the aircraft crashed into the sea. The ultimate test for the Enterprise came on May 14, 1945, after the flagship USS Bunker Hill was knocked out of action by 2 kamikazes. Admiral Mark Mitcher transferred his flag to the Big E. In the pre-dawn hours, a lone kamikaze, piloted by Lieutenant Junior Grade Shun Susuke Tomiyasu, expertly used cloud cover to approach the carrier. He broke through the defensive screen and dove. In the final seconds, he rolled his Zero upside down and plunged through the flight deck near the forward elevator. The explosion was catastrophic, blasting the 15-ton elevator hundreds of feet into the air, killing 14 sailors and wounding 68. It was a devastating blow that knocked the famous carrier out of the war for good. But the ship survived. Her damage control teams, no longer overwhelmed by multiple hits as they might have been earlier in the war, contained the fires. The Enterprise stayed afloat. The Mark 14 wasn't an impenetrable shield, but it was so effective that it dramatically reduced the number of hits ships had to endure, allowing them to absorb a blow and keep fighting. The Navy was losing a ship and a half a day during this period. But without the improved gunnery, the losses would have been far, far worse. The crippling feeling of helplessness was gone. Sailors finally had a weapon that they knew, with certainty, worked. The war in the Pacific ended with the atomic flash over Hiroshima and Nagasaki, but in the brutal war of attrition that preceded it, victory was forged in countless moments of innovation. The Mark 14 gun sight was one of the most important, yet most overlooked, of them all. Dr. Draper's insane idea to augment the gunner, not replace him, was a stroke of genius that saved countless ships and thousands of lives. The 85,000 shoebox-sized devices that came out of the collaborative efforts between a university lab and industrial manufacturers transformed naval warfare. They blunted the terrifying effectiveness of the kamikaze and gave the U.S. Navy the decisive edge in air defense when it was needed most. During the Okinawa campaign, where kamikaze attacks were at their most intense, an estimated 36 American warships were sunk and 368 damaged, with over 4,900 sailors killed. These numbers, as horrific as they are, would have been catastrophically higher without the improved accuracy provided by Draper's invention. Charles Stark Draper himself remained a humble academic, content to let his work speak for itself. But his legacy is undeniable. The reputation he and his lab earned on the battlefields of the Pacific was instrumental in them being chosen for the next great challenges of the 20th century. When President John F. Kennedy announced that America would go to the moon, it was Draper's lab, now renowned for its mastery of guidance systems, that received the first contract for the Apollo program. They were tasked with designing the Apollo guidance computer, the revolutionary 1 cubic foot machine that would navigate astronauts across 240,000 miles of space. When the Navy developed its most critical Cold War deterrent, the Polaris and later Trident nuclear missile systems, it was Draper's lab they turned to once again. They designed the incredibly precise inertial navigation systems that guide these submarine-launched missiles to their targets, a task that required unprecedented accuracy and reliability. The intellectual thread runs straight and true, from a modified rifle in an MIT basement to the flak-filled skies over the Pacific, to the surface of the moon, and to the heart of modern strategic defense. It all started with a simple, elegant, and revolutionary idea. It's a powerful reminder that sometimes the most profound solutions don't come from bigger budgets or more complex machines. They come from a single mind, looking at an impossible problem from a completely different angle and daring to pursue an idea that everyone else thinks is insane.